0 point in America. If you're listening to this video late at night, after a day so long your brain just wants to shut down, let me ask you something honest. If everything in your life dropped to 0, would you dare to start again? 3 weeks ago, I was standing in a parking lot in the United States, holding a cup of cold coffee, my heart heavy, my mind completely blank. No motivation. No confidence. Not even enough English to explain how broken I felt. And strangely enough, that exact moment became the starting point for everything. Love, family, and my English journey. You know this feeling. When you try to practice listening, reading, and speaking English, but your brain whispers, just quit. It's too late. Psychology calls this cognitive overload. When your brain is overwhelmed, it chooses survival over learning. I called it something simpler, exhaustion. Tired of trying to be a good husband. Tired of being a father in a foreign country. Tired of every English sentence coming out of my mouth carrying fear. Fear of being misunderstood. 3 weeks in the US isn't long, but it's long enough to expose everything. Our marriage felt like a house we had just moved into. Boxes everywhere, wires not connected, and one small bump could make everything collapse. My wife and I argued about tiny things. School pickup times, daily expenses, how to pronounce one simple English sentence when talking to our child's teacher. Sounds silly, right? But family conflicts rarely explode because of big things. They explode because of what never gets said. I remember one evening, the whole family sitting at the dinner table in silence. My child looked at me and asked very slowly in English, "Dad, are you okay?" Simple words. Basic vocabulary. But they hit me right in the chest. Because children don't care how much money you make or how fluent your English is. They read emotions. And at that moment, my emotion was a perfect 0. Psychology has a term called emotional reset. When you hit rock bottom, your brain is forced to rewrite the story you tell about yourself. I started doing something that sounded ridiculous at first, speaking English slowly, with my own family. Not to pass a test. Not to sound smart. But to understand each other. Very short sentences. Very real ones. I'm tired. I'm scared. I don't know how to fix this yet. When you speak slowly, your brain has time to process emotions before reacting. Science backs this up. Slow speech reduces activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for stress and fight-or-flight responses. You might be thinking, that sounds nice, but my life is different. I thought that too. Until I realized the only difference between me 3 weeks ago and me today wasn't my situation. It was how I listened. Not just listening to English, but listening to the person in front of me, my wife, my children, and myself. When you practice slow listening, you're not just training your ears. You're training patience. And patience is something every marriage needs, whether you're in Vietnam or the United States. Here's a slightly ironic truth. Your brain hates uncertainty, but it's addicted to familiar habits. even painful ones. I was used to staying silent when I didn't know how to say something in English. But silence, when it lasts too long, turns into distance. And distance in a family is more dangerous than arguments. At least arguments make noise. Silence slowly pulls the plug. Standing at that 0 point, I wasn't thinking about learning English at all. I was just trying not to let my family break one more time. And once that pressure disappeared, learning started happening naturally. Quietly. Honestly. When you stop trying to be good, your brain finally allows you to move forward. Basically, when you hit 0, your nervous system isn't failing you. It's asking you to slow down and rebuild from the ground up. Love under pressure. Here's something no one warns you about when you move to another country with someone you love. Pressure doesn't arrive loudly. It leaks in. Quietly. Through bills, schedules, accents, and expectations you never agreed on out loud. One morning, during my second week in the US, I realized my marriage wasn't breaking because we stopped loving each other. It was cracking because everything around us suddenly demanded more than we had energy to give. You felt this kind of pressure too, even if your situation looks different. When you sit down to practice English and your brain tightens up, that's pressure. When you think, I should be better by now, that's pressure wearing a polite mask. In relationships, pressure works the same way. It doesn't shout. It whispers comparisons. Other couples seem happier. Other parents seem calmer. Other immigrants sound more fluent. And slowly you stop talking. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you're afraid to say it wrong. My wife and I started having conversations that sounded normal on the surface, but felt sharp underneath. We talked about groceries, but we meant money. We talked about our kids' homework, but we meant fear they would struggle because of us. And when English entered the conversation, everything slowed down in the worst way. Searching for words gave emotions time to boil. By the time a sentence came out, it was already carrying frustration. Neuroscience explains this better than any argument ever could. Under stress, your brain prioritizes efficiency over empathy. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning and language, gets less power. Meanwhile, the amygdala takes over, scanning for threats. That's why, under pressure, your English gets worse and your temper gets shorter. It's not a personal failure. It's biology doing its job a little too well. There was a moment that stays with me. We were standing in the kitchen, deciding something small, what to cook for dinner. I said one sentence in English, slowly, carefully. My wife misunderstood it. Not because her English was bad, but because pressure had already colored the meaning. Her response came fast. Defensive. Mine followed the same way. And suddenly, dinner wasn't about food anymore. It was about feeling unseen. That's when I noticed something uncomfortable. I was trying to win conversations instead of understand them. Pressure turns love into a performance. You start proving instead of connecting. You correct instead of listening. And when language is involved, this gets amplified. Every correction feels like judgment. Every pause feels like weakness. So both people retreat. In English learning, there's a concept called comprehensible input. You only learn when the language is slightly above your current level, not overwhelming. Relationships work the same way. Emotional input has to be digestible. When everything is intense, nothing gets through. So I tried an experiment that went against my instincts. I lowered the difficulty. Fewer words. Slower pace. Less explaining. I stopped mid-argument one night and said very plainly, I feel pressure. I don't want to fight. The sentence wasn't elegant, but it was clear. Something shifted. Not magically, but physically. Our shoulders dropped. Breathing slowed. Science again. Naming emotions reduces their intensity. When you label stress, the brain stops treating it like an invisible threat. You might be thinking this sounds too simple. That real problems need real solutions. But simplicity is exactly what pressure removes first. Under stress, we overcomplicate everything. We add tone, history, sarcasm, and assumptions. Speaking slow English stripped all that away. What remained was intention. That week, I noticed our kids watching us closely. Children are pressure detectors. They don't analyze words, they read patterns. When they saw us slow down, they slowed down too. When they heard us choose simple sentences over sharp ones, their own English became clearer. That's when it hit me. Pressure doesn't just affect couples. It teaches children what normal feels like. For English learners, this matters more than you think. If your practice environment feels tense, your brain associates the language with threat. But if English becomes the tool you use to lower pressure, to clarify, to soften, to reconnect, it rewires your motivation. You don't avoid practice anymore. You lean into it because it feels safe. The truth is, love under pressure doesn't disappear. It hides. And language, especially slow, honest language, is how you invite it back out. Not with perfect grammar. Not with confident accents. But with sentences that do one job well, telling the truth without attacking. Pressure will always exist. In families. In learning. In life. The skill isn't avoiding it. The skill is lowering your speed enough that pressure doesn't decide who you become. Because when you slow down, pressure loses its favorite weapon, urgency. And without urgency, love remembers how to breathe again. Quiet English, loud feelings. There's a strange moment that happens when you speak English very slowly. The room gets quieter, but your feelings get louder. Not dramatic louder. Honest louder. I didn't expect that. I thought slow English would just sound awkward, like training wheels you're embarrassed to use in public. But during our third week in the US, I realized something uncomfortable. Speed was hiding my emotions. Slowness was exposing them. You've probably noticed this in your own practice. When you rush through English, you're not really communicating, you're escaping. Escaping mistakes. Escaping silence. Escaping the moment where you have to decide what you actually mean. In relationships, we do the same thing. We talk fast to avoid feeling. We argue fast to avoid listening. We fill the space with noise so we don't have to sit with truth. One night, after the kids were asleep, my wife and I sat on the couch. No TV. No phones. Just tired bodies and a quiet room. Normally, this is where misunderstandings start. But I tried something different. I spoke English like I was speaking to my own nervous system. Slowly. Carefully. I said, when we moved here I felt small. Long pause. I felt like I was failing you. Another pause. My grammar wasn't perfect. But my meaning was. Here's the science part, but don't worry, I'll keep it human. When you slow your speech, your brain activates more of the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for self-awareness and emotional regulation. Fast speech often comes from automatic processing. Slow speech forces intention. That's why therapy works the way it does. People don't heal by talking faster. They heal by talking clearer. What surprised me was her reaction. She didn't interrupt. She didn't correct my English. She leaned in. Literally. Her body language changed before her words did. Because humans process tone and pace before vocabulary. Even in a second language, emotion travels faster than grammar. This is where English practice quietly becomes emotional training. When you practice slow listening, you learn to tolerate silence. And silence is uncomfortable because it gives feelings room to show up. Most people quit English not because it's hard, but because silence makes them anxious. The brain fills silence with self-judgment. I sound stupid. They're waiting. I'm wasting time. That anxiety has nothing to do with language. It's about identity. I noticed my kids doing the same thing. When they spoke English slowly, they looked at us to check our faces. Not for correction, but for safety. Are you still smiling? Are you still patient? That's when it hit me. Fluency at home isn't about speed. It's about trust. If the environment feels safe, words come. If it feels tense, even native speakers shut down. There's a psychological concept called affective filter. When your emotional filter is high, stress, fear, embarrassment, learning gets blocked. When the filter is low, the brain absorbs language naturally. Quiet English lowered our filter. It turned conversations from performances into exchanges. From proving into sharing. One small habit changed everything. Before responding, we started taking one full breath. Just one. Breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which tells your body it's safe. safe to speak, safe to listen, safe to make mistakes. That single breath did more for our communication than any vocabulary app ever could. You might be wondering how this helps you. Here's the practical part. When you practice English, especially speaking, practice as if you're talking to someone you love, not someone you're trying to impress. Say fewer words. Pause on purpose. Let your brain catch up with your heart. Record yourself speaking slowly and listen back, not for mistakes, but for meaning. Ask yourself, does this sound like a human or a machine rushing to finish? There's a quiet power in slow English. It doesn't dominate the room. It invites the room to listen. In my family, it turned tension into curiosity, arguments into conversations, distance into closeness. And yes, it also made our English better, but that became a side effect, not the goal. Because when feelings finally have space to speak, language stops being the enemy. It becomes the bridge. And bridges, by design, are built slowly, or they collapse under weight. In the end, I learned this: loud emotions don't need loud words. They need honest ones, delivered at a speed the heart can handle. Children watching us. There's a moment every parent misses, not because it's hidden, but because it's too ordinary. It happens when you think your kids are busy with toys or homework or screens, while they're actually studying you. Not your words. Your tone. Your pauses. Your silence. During our third week in the US, I realized our children weren't just learning English from school. They were learning what stress sounds like in a second language. From us. One afternoon, my son was practicing reading out loud. Very slowly. He stopped after every sentence, looking up, waiting. Not for help with pronunciation. For permission to continue. That look hit me harder than any argument I'd had with my wife. Because I recognized it. It was the same look I gave people when I spoke English outside the house. Am I safe to keep going? Psychology calls this social referencing. Children read emotional cues from adults to decide how to feel about unfamiliar situations. Language is one of those situations. When parents show impatience, kids associate language with danger. When parents show calm curiosity, kids associate language with exploration. Without realizing it, we were teaching our kids what English meant emotionally, not academically. At dinner, something subtle started happening. When my wife and I slowed down our English, our kids mirrored it. When we chose simpler sentences instead of sharper ones, they relaxed. Their shoulders dropped. Their voices softened. Neuroscience explains this with mirror neurons, brain cells that copy observed behavior. Your children's nervous systems sync with yours. If you're rushed, they rush. If you're tense, they tense. If you slow down, they learn that slowing down is allowed. That's when I understood a hard truth. Our marriage problems weren't staying between us. They were leaking into the emotional climate of the house. Not as trauma. As atmosphere. And atmosphere shapes learning more than instruction ever will. One night, my daughter asked me a question in English. She mixed up tenses. I knew the correct form. Every instinct told me to fix it immediately. But I paused. I smiled. I said, "I understand you." That was it. No correction. Her face lit up like she had just unlocked something secret. Because comprehension feels like success, especially to a child. Language acquisition research confirms this. Correction without connection slows learning. When learners, especially children, feel emotionally secure, their brains prioritize meaning over form. Grammar improves later. Naturally. But safety has to come first. At home, English stopped being a test. It became a shared tool. You might think this only applies if you have kids. It doesn't. Your inner child is watching you too. Every time you criticize yourself for speaking slowly, you're teaching your brain that learning equals shame. Every time you rush through a sentence just to get it over with, you reinforce anxiety. But when you allow yourself to speak imperfectly and stay present, you model patience for yourself. We started doing something small but powerful. After dinner, each of us shared one sentence in English about the day. Just one. No corrections allowed. Only listening. At first, it felt awkward. Then it felt warm. Then it felt normal. Routine rewires the brain. Repetition plus safety equals progress. The kids started asking more questions. Not because they suddenly loved English, but because English had stopped biting back. It wasn't something that embarrassed their parents anymore. It wasn't something that caused tension in the room. It was just language. Here's the part no one tells you. Children don't need fluent parents. They need regulated ones. Parents who can sit in uncertainty without panicking. Who can make mistakes without collapsing. Who can listen without rushing to fix. Those skills transfer directly into how children approach learning, English included. Watching my kids watch us changed how I practiced English forever. I stopped asking, "Do I sound good?" and started asking, "Do I sound safe?" Because safety is contagious. And in a family, it spreads faster than stress ever did. In the end, our children weren't learning English from our words. They were learning courage, from how we stayed present even when words came slowly. And that lesson will outlast any accent they ever develop. 3 weeks test. 3 weeks sounds harmless when you say it out loud. Short. Temporary. Something you can push through by telling yourself, just hold on a little longer. But 3 weeks is a psychological trap. It's long enough for excitement to fade, long enough for exhaustion to settle in, and just long enough for the truth to stop being polite. Our 3 weeks in the United States didn't feel like a transition period. They felt like a quiet, relentless test, of love, of patience, and of how much uncertainty a family can hold without falling apart. You've probably faced this same test with English, even if your life looks nothing like mine. The first few days feel hopeful. New notebooks. New videos. New promises to yourself. Then somewhere around week 2 or 3, motivation disappears. Your brain stops asking, "How fast can I improve?" and starts asking, "Why am I even doing this?" Behavioral psychology explains this clearly. Novelty-driven dopamine drops sharply after the second week. What's left isn't excitement, it's discipline, emotion, and meaning. That's exactly where we were as a family. By the third week, the kids were adapting faster than we were. They picked up phrases from school. They laughed at jokes we didn't fully understand yet. Meanwhile, my wife and I felt like our emotional batteries never reached 100%. Every morning started with effort. Every conversation required translation, not just between languages, but between intentions. We weren't fighting because we hated each other. We were tired of trying to hold everything together without enough rest or clarity. There was one morning that captured the entire third week perfectly. We were running late. The kids were distracted. My wife said something in English, quickly. I misheard one word. That one word changed the meaning in my head. I responded defensively. She thought I wasn't listening. Our voices rose just enough for the air in the room to tighten. Not shouting. Worse. That cold, sharp tone that tells children something is wrong before anyone admits it. And then everything went quiet. That silence wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. Silence like that isn't empty. It's heavy with interpretation. Neuroscience shows that under prolonged stress, the brain becomes hypersensitive to threat. This is called negative bias. Your nervous system starts assuming the worst with less evidence. In a second language, where mishearing is common, negative bias turns tiny misunderstandings into emotional explosions. That morning could have followed an old script. Blame. Withdrawal. Quiet resentment that lasts all day. But something different happened, not because we were strong, but because we were exhausted enough to stop pretending. I didn't rush to defend myself. I didn't try to explain everything perfectly in English. I said one sentence, slowly, honestly. I think we are very tired. Not angry. The sentence wasn't elegant, but it was accurate. And accuracy matters more than fluency when emotions are involved. Psychologists call this cognitive reframing. When you change the label of a situation, the emotional response shifts with it. Instead of "you're attacking me," the story became "we're exhausted." That small shift lowered the emotional temperature in the room. Shoulders relaxed. Breathing slowed. The kids started moving again. That was the moment I understood what the third week really tests. It doesn't test love. Love usually survives. It tests regulation. Can you stay emotionally present when your resources are low? Can you choose clarity over speed when your brain wants shortcuts? This applies directly to English learning. Most people don't quit because English is too hard. They quit because they reach the phase where effort is required without immediate reward. The third week is where learning stops feeling inspiring and starts feeling personal. Mistakes hurt more. Progress feels invisible. And the temptation to quit suddenly sounds reasonable. We decided to treat the third week not as something to survive, but as something to study. Like a laboratory. Instead of asking, who is wrong? We started asking, what is missing? Sleep? Food? Reassurance? Simpler language? Naming the real problem reduced conflict faster than any apology ever could. I applied the same approach to my English. I stopped chasing improvement and started chasing stability. Could I express one clear thought when tired? Could I listen fully without planning my reply? Research shows that under moderate stress, learning can actually strengthen. If the learner feels emotionally supported. Without support, stress shuts learning down completely. The kids felt the shift before we did. When we stopped snapping, they stopped shrinking. When we admitted we were tired instead of pretending everything was fine, they relaxed. That's emotional modeling. Children don't learn calm from lectures. They learn it from watching adults regulate themselves under pressure. Every night during that third week, we introduced a simple ritual. One sentence each. In English. Slowly. One thing that went right that day. No corrections. No analysis. Just listening. This wasn't about positivity. It was about grounding. Gratitude spoken out loud has been shown to lower cortisol and improve emotional regulation. It also strengthens memory, because emotion tags experience. By the end of the third week, nothing was fixed. Our English wasn't suddenly fluent. Our marriage wasn't magically healed. But something important had changed. We weren't reacting anymore. We were responding. Adjusting. Learning the rhythm of each other again. In a new country, in a new language, under real pressure. That's what the third week is for. Not to break you, but to show you what remains when excitement disappears. If you can stay present in this phase, if you can speak slowly, listen deeply, and choose accuracy over speed, you're building something far more durable than motivation. Because once you pass the third week, you stop asking, "Can I do this?" And you start realizing, "I already am." Broken talks, soft words. There's a specific sound conversations make right before they break. It's not shouting. It's not silence either. It's speed. Words coming out faster than understanding can keep up. I didn't notice it at first, but once I did, I couldn't unhear it. During our third week in the US, most of our arguments weren't caused by what we said. They were caused by how fast we said it, especially in English. You've experienced this too. You start a sentence calmly, but halfway through, your brain realizes it might be wrong. So you rush. You stack words. You talk over pauses because silence feels dangerous. In language learning, this is called output panic. In relationships, it's called miscommunication. Same nervous system. Same root cause. One evening, after a long day, my wife and I tried to talk about something simple, plans for the weekend. The conversation kept looping. We weren't disagreeing, but we weren't connecting either. Every sentence felt slightly off, like a radio station that never quite tunes in. That's when she said something that stuck with me. We're talking, but we're not landing. She was right. Our words were broken, not because our English was bad, but because our pacing was. Neuroscience explains why this matters. When speech speed increases under stress, the listener's brain shifts from comprehension mode to defense mode. Even neutral words can feel sharp. Meaning gets lost. Intention gets misread. This is why arguments escalate so quickly when both people feel unheard. So we tried something that felt almost childish. We slowed everything down on purpose. One sentence at a time. Short sentences. Soft words. Not polite words, honest ones. Instead of explaining, we named. I'm confused. I feel rushed. I need a moment. These weren't elegant phrases, but they were emotionally precise. What surprised me most was how powerful simplicity became. There's research in linguistics showing that comprehension increases when sentences stay within a certain length, especially for non-native speakers. But what no one tells you is that emotional comprehension works the same way. Long explanations often hide uncertainty. Short sentences reveal truth. I noticed my body reacting before my mind did. When words slowed down, my shoulders relaxed. My breathing deepened. That's not poetic, it's physiological. Slow speech activates the vagus nerve, which signals safety to the body. Safety is the foundation of listening. Without it, communication turns into noise. This changed how I practiced English too. I stopped trying to sound natural and started trying to sound clear. I practiced saying difficult things in simple ways. Not because I lacked vocabulary, but because clarity required courage. Saying less leaves less room to hide. That's true in language and in love. There was a moment that proved this worked. We were discussing a sensitive topic, money. Normally, this would spiral. Numbers trigger fear. Fear speeds everything up. But this time, I said one sentence and stopped. I'm worried, not blaming. I waited. The pause felt long. But it held. She nodded. And for the first time, the conversation didn't fracture. Psychologists talk about repair attempts, small actions that prevent conflict from escalating. Soft words are powerful repair tools. They lower defenses. They invite collaboration. In our case, English, spoken slowly, became the medium for repair. Not because it was perfect, but because it forced us to be intentional. You might think soft words mean weak communication. They don't. They mean regulated communication. Strength isn't volume. It's control. Anyone can speak loudly. It takes skill to speak gently when emotions are high. Our kids noticed immediately. When conversations slowed, they leaned in instead of pulling away. When voices softened, the room felt larger. This aligns with family systems theory. Emotional tone spreads faster than content. You don't need to understand every word to feel whether a space is safe. Here's something practical you can try in your own English practice. Take one emotionally loaded sentence you often say in your native language. Translate it into English using the fewest words possible. Then practice saying it slowly out loud. Notice how it feels in your body. If your chest tightens, slow down more. The goal isn't fluency. It's alignment between words and emotion. Broken conversations aren't usually fixed by better arguments. They're fixed by softer starts. Linguist John Gottman calls this a soft startup, beginning a conversation without blame or urgency. Couples who master this aren't luckier. They're slower. By the end of that week, our conversations weren't perfect. But they were reparable. When misunderstandings happened, they didn't collapse the whole structure. We had learned how to patch them, with pauses, with naming, with soft words spoken at a human pace. This is where English stopped being just a skill. It became a discipline. A way to slow my nervous system. A way to choose connection over control. A way to say what mattered without setting everything on fire. Broken talks don't need smarter words. They need kinder timing. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do in a second language, or a marriage, is to stop mid-sentence, breathe, and let softness do the heavy lifting. Because when words are gentle, understanding doesn't have to fight its way in. It simply arrives. Science of listening. Most people think listening is passive. Like something that just happens if your ears are open and the sound is loud enough. That belief quietly ruins both language learning and relationships. I didn't understand this until our 4th week in the US, when I realized that nothing in our family had really changed except one thing: the way we listened. Not better grammar. Not more vocabulary. Just listening, done slowly on purpose with the body involved. You've probably felt this before. You hear English, but nothing sticks. Words pass through you like background noise. Later, you blame your memory, your age, your bad ear. But neuroscience tells a different story. Listening isn't a single action. It's a complex process involving attention, emotion, prediction, and trust. When any one of those is missing, comprehension collapses. Under stress, your brain doesn't listen to understand. It listens to protect. This is controlled by the amygdala, which constantly scans for threat. If it senses danger, social judgment, embarrassment, conflict. It pulls resources away from the auditory cortex. That's why English sounds faster when you're anxious. The sound hasn't changed. Your brain has. I saw this clearly one afternoon when my wife was explaining something important. I was hearing the words, but I wasn't receiving them. My body was tense. My jaw was tight. I was preparing a response instead of absorbing meaning. That's not listening. That's waiting to speak. And most people do this without realizing it. So we ran a small experiment. During conversations, we focused on the body first. Feet on the floor. Shoulders down. Eyes steady. Then listening. This sounds simple, but it's backed by science. Grounding the body sends a signal of safety to the nervous system. Safety opens access to higher cognitive functions, like language comprehension. There's a concept in cognitive psychology called top-down processing. Your brain predicts what it's about to hear based on context and emotion. If the prediction is "this is stressful," comprehension narrows. If the prediction is "this is safe," your brain opens up to detail. Slow listening changes the prediction. It tells the brain, you don't need to rush. Nothing bad is about to happen. This is why slow English works so well for learning. Not because the words are easier, but because the emotional environment allows listening to actually occur. Speed kills comprehension before vocabulary ever has a chance. I tested this with my kids. When they spoke English quickly and nervously, I listened without interrupting. When they slowed down, I leaned in. Not to correct, to receive. Their sentences became clearer almost immediately. Not grammatically perfect, but emotionally confident. Confidence improves fluency more than correction ever will. In our marriage, listening became an act of care instead of efficiency. We stopped interrupting not out of politeness, but because interruption breaks the listener's neural processing. Studies show that even brief interruptions reset comprehension. Meaning has to rebuild from zero. No wonder arguments feel endless. I also changed how I practiced listening to English content. Instead of playing videos faster, I slowed them down. I listened once without subtitles, focusing only on rhythm and emotion. Then again with subtitles, matching sound to meaning. This aligns with research on auditory learning, separating emotional processing from linguistic decoding reduces cognitive load. Here's a practical technique you can try right now. When listening to English, don't repeat the words. Repeat the intention. After a sentence, pause and ask yourself, what is this person trying to do? Inform, comfort, persuade. Intention anchors meaning. Your brain remembers purpose better than phrasing. Listening also requires humility. When you truly listen, you accept that you might be changed by what you hear. That's uncomfortable. It's easier to listen just enough to respond. But deep listening dissolves control. In our family, this meant accepting feelings we didn't plan for. Fear, grief, hope, all arriving through simple English sentences. Neuroscience confirms this discomfort. Deep listening activates the anterior cingulate cortex, involved in empathy and error detection. You become aware of mismatch between what you assumed and what's actually true. Growth lives in that gap. By the end of that week, arguments didn't vanish, but their lifespan shortened. Misunderstandings were noticed earlier, repaired faster. Listening had become a skill we practiced, not a habit we assumed we had. Here's the quiet lesson: your ears don't learn languages. Your nervous system does. When your body feels safe, listening becomes accurate. When it doesn't, even familiar words sound foreign. So if English feels impossible sometimes, don't ask, "What word did I miss?" Ask, "Was I calm enough to hear it?" That question changes everything. In the end, listening isn't about sound traveling inward. It's about safety traveling outward. And once safety is present, language, any language, finally has a place to land. Relearning each other. There's a quiet grief that comes with realizing you don't fully know the person you love anymore. Not because they changed suddenly, but because life slowly rewrote them while you were busy surviving. I felt that grief during our weeks in the US, sitting across from my wife at the kitchen table, noticing how unfamiliar her pauses felt, how her silences carried different weight. We weren't strangers, but we weren't fluent in each other anymore either. You felt something similar with English. One day you realize the language you studied doesn't quite match the world you're living in. The phrases you memorized feel stiff. The confidence you expected never arrived. That gap, the space between expectation and reality, is where discouragement grows. But it's also where relearning begins. Relearning a person is not about remembering facts. It's about updating your internal model of them. Cognitive science calls this prediction error. Your brain expects one response and receives another. The discomfort you feel is the brain being asked to revise its assumptions. Most people avoid this. They cling to old narratives because they feel stable. But growth, emotional or linguistic, requires rewriting those predictions. My wife and I realized we were still speaking to earlier versions of each other. Versions shaped by our old routines, our old country, our old roles. But the people in front of us were different. More tired. More cautious. More vulnerable. And vulnerability doesn't respond well to fast speech or fixed expectations. So we started relearning each other the same way beginners relearn a language. Slowly, with curiosity, without assuming fluency. Instead of asking, "Why are you like this?" we asked, "Is this new for you too?" That small shift removed judgment from the question. Curiosity activates a completely different neural pathway than criticism. One opens the mind. The other closes it. There's research showing that couples who regularly update their understanding of each other, what psychologists call relationship maintenance cognition, experience higher long-term satisfaction. They don't assume knowledge. They ask. Again and again. Relearning isn't a failure. It's maintenance. We applied the same mindset to English. I stopped assuming I should know certain words by now. That assumption was poisoning motivation. When you believe you're behind, every mistake confirms the story. But when you adopt a beginner's curiosity, mistakes become data. Information. Not verdicts. One night, we played a simple game. We each described the same day using 3 English sentences. Just 3. No corrections. What surprised me wasn't our language. It was how different our experiences of the same day were. I noticed tasks. She noticed emotions. Neither was wrong. But until we slowed down enough to listen, those differences stayed hidden. This is how distance forms in relationships. Not from conflict, but from unshared realities. Language, when used gently, becomes a tool for alignment. You don't need complex vocabulary to understand someone. You need presence. Our kids joined in naturally. They asked questions. They interrupted. They laughed at our mistakes. That laughter mattered. Laughter lowers defensiveness. It signals safety. In neuroscience terms, it releases oxytocin, which strengthens social bonds. English stopped being something we performed and became something we played with. Relearning also required letting go of speed. Speed assumes familiarity. Slowness invites discovery. When you slow down, you notice microsignals, tone shifts, hesitations, energy changes. Those signals carry meaning words often miss. There was a moment when my wife said something very simple. I miss feeling light. Not happy. Not successful. Light. That word stayed with me. I wouldn't have heard it if I'd been preparing a response. I would have missed the invitation inside it. Listening like this is emotionally risky. When you relearn someone, you accept that they may need things you can't immediately provide. That uncertainty is uncomfortable. But avoiding it creates distance. Facing it creates intimacy. For English learners, this lesson is crucial. You don't relearn a language by forcing output. You relearn it by allowing input to change you. By letting go of who you thought you should be and meeting who you are now. By the end of that phase, our relationship didn't feel fixed. It felt updated. Like software patched to run in a new environment. Familiar, but more responsive. Less rigid. More forgiving. Here's the truth most people avoid. Love isn't maintained by memory. It's maintained by attention. The same is true for language. What you pay attention to grows. What you assume stays stagnant. So if your relationship, or your English, feels out of sync, don't push harder. Slow down. Ask again. Listen as if you're meeting this person for the first time. Because relearning isn't going backward. It's how you move forward together, without pretending nothing has changed. Small daily rituals. Big changes rarely save relationships. Small, repeated ones do. I didn't understand this until our days in the US started blending together. School mornings, grocery trips, late dinners, quiet exhaustion settling in like background noise. Nothing dramatic was happening anymore, and yet everything felt fragile. That's when we realized survival wasn't the problem. Sustainability was. You've seen this in English learning too. You don't fail because you miss one day. You fail because there's nothing small and steady pulling you back the next day. Motivation is unreliable. Rituals are not. Behavioral science shows that habits anchored to specific moments in the day are far more likely to stick than goals tied to emotion. Families work the same way. We started with something almost embarrassingly simple. Every morning, before phones, before schedules, before English lessons or arguments, we shared one sentence at the kitchen counter. One sentence only. In English. Something real. I slept badly. I feel nervous today. I'm excited about nothing in particular. No fixing. No comments. Just acknowledgement. That single sentence changed the emotional temperature of the day. Neuroscience explains why. When you name an internal state, you activate the prefrontal cortex and reduce limbic reactivity. In plain language, feelings lose their grip when they're recognized. Our days became less reactive, not because problems disappeared, but because they were named early before they could grow teeth. We added another ritual at dinner. One person spoke. Everyone else listened. No interruptions. No corrections. Not even clarifying questions. At first, this felt unnatural. We're used to overlapping, filling gaps, showing engagement by talking. But silence, we learned, is also engagement. Especially for language learners. The kids struggled at first. They wanted to jump in. But soon, they started waiting. That waiting mattered. It taught patience in a way no lecture ever could. Mirror neurons did the rest. Our listening rituals rewired the rhythm of the household. For English practice, rituals worked better than study plans. I stopped promising myself 30 minutes a day. Instead, I tied English to moments that already existed. One short video while making coffee. One sentence spoken while washing dishes. One reflection at night. These micro-practices lowered resistance. The brain doesn't fight what feels familiar. There's research supporting this. Habits form through contextual cues, not willpower. When behavior is linked to a stable context, time, place, or emotion, it becomes automatic. That's why rituals feel grounding. They don't ask, "Do you feel like it?" They ask, "Is it morning?" Rituals also gave us something powerful during conflict, a return point. When days went badly, we didn't spiral. We waited for the next ritual. Morning sentence. Dinner listening. Night reflection. Structure doesn't solve emotional problems, but it contains them. Containment prevents damage. One night, after a tense day, we sat down for our final ritual. One sentence about the day, spoken slowly in English. My sentence was simple: I almost gave up today. I didn't elaborate. I didn't explain. I just let it sit. The room held it. No one rushed to fix it. That pause felt like support. From a psychological perspective, rituals create predictability, and predictability equals safety for the nervous system. When life feels unstable, small predictable actions anchor the body. That safety frees up mental resources for empathy, for learning, for connection. Our kids began creating their own rituals. Reading together. Asking one question before bed. They didn't do this because we told them to. They did it because rituals invite participation. They're inclusive by design. You might think rituals sound boring. They are. And that's the point. Boring is safe. Safe is where growth happens. Excitement is nice, but it's inconsistent. Rituals show up even when no one feels inspired. For English learners, this matters deeply. If English only appears when you're motivated, it will always feel optional. When it's embedded in daily life, it becomes part of who you are, not something you perform. Over time, these small rituals changed how we saw progress. We stopped measuring improvement by outcomes and started measuring it by presence. Did we show up today? Did we listen? Did we speak honestly, even briefly? Those became our metrics. By the end of those weeks, nothing about our life looked impressive from the outside. But from the inside, it felt steadier, connected, less fragile. The rituals didn't remove stress. They gave us a way to carry it without dropping everything else. That's the quiet power of small daily rituals. They don't demand transformation. They create conditions where transformation becomes possible. And when life or language feels overwhelming, that's all you really need, one small repeatable way to begin again tomorrow. When giving up feels easy, there's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't come with tears or breakdowns. It shows up as indifference. The quiet thought that says, maybe this is just how things are now. That thought visited me often during our time in the US, especially after the routines settled in and the adrenaline wore off. Giving up didn't feel painful. It felt practical. And that's what made it dangerous. You've probably met this feeling in your English journey. Not frustration. Not anger. Just a dull sense that continuing doesn't matter anymore. Psychology calls this learned helplessness, when repeated effort without visible reward trains the brain to stop trying. The brain isn't lazy. It's efficient. It stops investing energy where it predicts low return. In relationships, this shows up quietly. You stop explaining. You stop correcting misunderstandings. You tell yourself, it's not worth it. Not because you don't care, but because caring feels expensive. Emotional effort becomes something you ration. I noticed it one evening when my wife and I misunderstood each other again. Nothing big. Nothing worth arguing over. And yet, instead of repairing it, I almost let it slide into distance. That was the moment I realized giving up wasn't loud. It was comfortable. It asked nothing from me. Neuroscience explains why this happens. When the brain experiences repeated stress without resolution, it reduces emotional investment to protect itself. This isn't weakness. It's survival. But survival mode is a terrible place to build intimacy or learn a language. It trades growth for safety. The hardest part is that giving up often feels like relief. No more effort. No more vulnerability. No more trying to find the right English words or the right emotional tone. But relief is temporary. Distance is what follows. I caught myself mid-thought one night. Why even explain? She won't understand. That sentence wasn't about language. It was about hope. And hope, once questioned, starts fading fast. So I did something that felt counterintuitive. Instead of pushing harder, I went smaller. I didn't try to fix the relationship or my English. I chose one action that required minimal energy but preserved connection. I said one sentence, I don't want to stop trying. That was it. Psychologists call this a microcommitment. Tiny actions that interrupt the giving up spiral. Research shows that small commitments restore a sense of agency far more effectively than big resolutions. The brain needs proof that effort still leads somewhere, even if that somewhere is just a moment of honesty. That sentence changed the tone of the evening. Not because it solved anything, but because it reintroduced intention. Intention is the opposite of helplessness. It tells the brain, I'm still here. The same principle applies to English learning. When quitting feels logical, don't double your study time. Reduce it. Choose the smallest possible action that keeps you engaged. One sentence. 1 minute. One listen. Momentum doesn't start with intensity. It starts with continuity. I also noticed how giving up affected our kids. When we disengaged, they became quieter, more cautious. Children sense emotional withdrawal even when adults think they're hiding it. Family systems theory explains this. When one part of the system shuts down, the entire system compensates. Often through anxiety. That realization hurt. Not because we were failing, but because our withdrawal was teaching them something. That when things get hard, you stop trying. That lesson would follow them long after English or this country faded from memory. So we made a quiet rule: no silent quitting. If something felt too hard, we said it out loud.
I'm tired. I'm overwhelmed.
I don't know what to do next. These weren't solutions. They were signals. Signals keep systems alive. From a neurological perspective, naming difficulty re-engages the prefrontal cortex. It moves the brain out of shutdown and back into regulation. Language doesn't have to be sophisticated to do this. It just has to be honest. There were still days when giving up felt tempting. It didn't disappear. But it lost its power to isolate. We learned that the danger isn't feeling like quitting. The danger is doing it alone, silently, without witness. In English learning, isolation kills progress faster than mistakes. When you stop sharing your process, your confusion, your slow pace, you start believing you're uniquely broken. You're not. You're human. By choosing to stay, minimally, imperfectly, we kept the door open. Connection doesn't require grand gestures. It requires presence when absence would be easier. Here's the truth no motivational speech tells you. Persistence isn't heroic. It's often boring. It's choosing to speak one more soft sentence when silence would cost less. It's listening when disengagement feels justified. It's practicing English when no one is watching and no progress is visible. Giving up feels easy because it asks nothing. Staying asks something small, but it gives something back. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But steadily. And sometimes, that's enough to change the direction of a life, a relationship, or a language journey. One quiet decision at a time. From survival to meaning. For a long time, our family wasn't living. We were managing. Getting through days. Solving the next problem. Avoiding the next conflict. Survival has its own rhythm. Short-term thinking, emotional efficiency, minimal risk. It keeps you afloat, but it doesn't tell you where you're going. I didn't notice how long we had been in that mode until one quiet afternoon in the US, when nothing urgent was happening and yet my body still felt tense, waiting for the next hit. That's one sign of survival mode. The danger is gone, but the nervous system hasn't gotten the memo. Psychology explains this well. When stress is prolonged, the brain recalibrates its baseline. Cortisol becomes familiar. Calm feels suspicious. Even when life stabilizes, the mind stays braced. Many immigrants, language learners, and families under pressure live like this for years. Functional, productive, but internally exhausted. We had solved many external problems by that point. Housing, school, daily routines. Even communication had improved. And yet, something was missing. We weren't falling apart anymore, but we also weren't moving toward anything. We had reduced pain, not created meaning. Meaning is different from happiness. Happiness is a state. Meaning is a direction. Neuroscientist Viktor Frankl wrote that humans can endure almost any how if they have a why. Survival mode answers how do we get through today? Meaning asks, what is all this for? The shift began with a small question my wife asked one evening, in slow, careful English. What are we learning from this? Not why is this happening, but what are we learning? That question changed everything. Learning reframes suffering. It doesn't justify it, but it integrates it. From a cognitive perspective, meaning-making helps the brain organize experience into narrative memory rather than trauma memory. In simple terms, pain becomes part of a story, not just a wound. We started talking, not about problems, but about insights. What had living in another country taught us about patience? About power? About silence? About ourselves? These conversations felt different. Less defensive. More reflective. We weren't trying to fix anything. We were trying to understand. English played a surprising role here. Because our vocabulary was limited, our thoughts became clearer. We couldn't hide behind complex explanations. We had to choose what mattered. I learned I am afraid of being wrong. I learned I listen better when I slow down. Simple sentences. Deep truths. Research on second language processing shows that using a non-native language can reduce emotional bias and increase cognitive distance. That distance helped us examine our experiences without being overwhelmed by them. English became not just a tool, but a lens. Our children joined these conversations naturally. They asked questions adults often avoid. Why do people treat us differently? Why do you look tired even when you're home? We didn't rush to protect them from discomfort. We answered honestly, at their level. That honesty created trust. Family systems theory suggests that shared meaning strengthens resilience more than comfort does. When everyone understands the why, they tolerate the how better. Our family wasn't just reacting anymore. We were interpreting. This shift also changed how we approached English learning. We stopped asking, how fast can we improve? And started asking, what kind of people do we become while learning? Are we patient, curious, kind to ourselves? Those qualities mattered more than fluency. Meaning slowed us down, in a good way. We no longer chased progress for its own sake. We paid attention to alignment. Were our actions matching our values? Were we modeling the kind of perseverance we wanted our children to internalize? There were moments when survival instincts kicked back in. Stress didn't disappear. But now, stress had context. It wasn't just pressure. It was part of a chosen path. That distinction matters. The brain processes chosen difficulty differently from imposed difficulty. Autonomy changes everything. I remember realizing one morning that I wasn't counting days anymore. I wasn't waiting for an endpoint. I was present. That presence wasn't excitement. It was groundedness. A sense that even if things stayed hard, they were worth staying with. Meaning doesn't arrive as an answer. It emerges through attention, through reflection, through shared language, even broken language. Especially broken language. Looking back, survival was necessary. It kept us intact. But meaning is what allowed us to grow, to connect, to see our struggles not as detours, but as part of the road. For anyone learning English, building a family, or starting over in a new place, this matters. Don't rush out of survival before you've listened to what it's teaching you. But don't stay there forever either. At some point the question shifts, from how do I get through this, to who am I becoming because of this? And when that question appears, you know you're no longer just surviving. Would you dare again? Imagine standing at the edge of something you already know will hurt a little. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's honest. That's what rebuilding love from zero feels like. It's not dramatic like the movies. It's quiet, awkward, slow, and deeply uncomfortable in the exact places you used to hide. 3 weeks ago, if you had asked me whether I would dare to do this again, move countries, strain a marriage, raise children in another language, I would have laughed and said no. Today, my answer surprises even me. Yes, I would dare again. Not because it was easy, but because it changed who we are. By the end of our 3rd week in the US, nothing looked magical from the outside. Our English was still imperfect. Our schedules were still messy. Our kids still had emotional swings. My wife and I still misunderstood each other sometimes. But the quality of our days had shifted. We weren't trying to return to who we used to be. We were becoming someone new, together. That distinction matters more than motivation ever will. Behavioral psychology shows that lasting change doesn't come from willpower. It comes from identity. When you see yourself as someone who is rebuilding, effort feels meaningful instead of exhausting. Language learning, marriage repair, parenting under pressure, they stop being burdens and start being expressions of who you are becoming. English played a quiet but powerful role here. Because we were still learning, we had to be intentional. We chose words carefully. We listened longer. We paused before reacting. These habits spilled into our relationship. Slower language created slower emotions. Slower emotions created space. And space is where connection lives. One evening, after the kids went to bed, my wife said something simple in English, "I trust us more now." No metaphors. No long explanation. Just that. Trust didn't mean certainty. It meant resilience. The belief that even if things broke again, we knew how to repair. That's the real gift of rebuilding from zero. You don't just fix what's broken. You learn how to fix. You gain process, not perfection. For our children, the lesson was even clearer. They saw adults who didn't pretend to know everything, who made mistakes publicly, who kept trying without self-contempt. Developmental psychology calls this secure modeling. Kids don't need flawless parents. They need parents who recover well, who show that difficulty isn't a verdict, it's a phase. Language learning works the same way. Fluency isn't the goal. Recovery is. Can you keep speaking after a mistake? Can you stay present after confusion? Can you continue even when you feel exposed? Those skills predict success far more than vocabulary size ever will. If you're watching this video while feeling tired, stuck, or tempted to quit, especially with English, hear this clearly: stopping doesn't protect you from discomfort. It only delays growth. The discomfort you're avoiding now will wait for you later, usually with interest. But daring again doesn't mean being reckless. It means choosing small courage. Speaking one sentence slowly. Listening without interrupting. Admitting you don't understand and staying anyway. Repairing instead of defending. These actions look insignificant, but they compound. Neuroscience backs this up. Repeated small acts of approach, rather than avoidance, retrain the amygdala to lower threat responses. Over time, what once felt terrifying becomes neutral, then familiar, then empowering. Confidence is not a personality trait. It's a byproduct of repeated survival. Our family didn't rebuild love by making grand promises. We rebuilt it through micro-decisions. To stay. To listen. To try again tomorrow. To speak even when our accents showed. To love even when the ground still felt unstable. So would I dare again? I would dare because I now know something I didn't before. Starting from zero is not a failure state. It's a design opportunity. You get to choose what matters. What stays. What changes. You get to build on purpose instead of habit. If this story resonates with you, let it remind you of one simple truth: you don't need to be ready to begin. You just need to be willing to stay. Stay with the language. Stay with the people you love. Stay with yourself. Everything meaningful grows from there. If you've made it this far, pause for a second and ask yourself one honest question. What would happen if you didn't quit this time? Not quitting English. Not quitting the relationship. Not quitting yourself. Most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they leave right before things start to change. And rebuilding love, language, or life from zero always looks quiet before it looks meaningful. This story isn't just mine. It's a mirror. Somewhere out there, someone is watching this video late at night, tired of starting over, tired of feeling behind, tired of pretending they're fine. If that's you, let this be your sign. Slow progress is still progress. Broken English can still carry real feelings. And imperfect people can still build something strong, together. On this channel, we don't chase fast fluency or fake motivation. We practice real English through real life, real emotions, real struggles, one slow, honest story at a time. If you want English that feels human, healing, and possible again. This is where you belong. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story. Like the video if this touched something real inside you. Comment below, would you dare to rebuild from zero? Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay and keep listening.